Welcome to the Tyee's inaugural webinar Zoom feed bonanza. My name is Emma Cooper. I'm the outreach manager here. And with us, we have Christopher Cheung, reporter extraordinaire. And thank you so much for joining us on this little experiment. We're going to have a really fun, short and sweet interview with Chris, talking about three things, kind of trying to piece through a few themes from his most recent stories and just have a nice conversation about it. So again, thank you to all of the people who've registered. We've got folks chatting here on Zoom. People are going to be chatting on Facebook as well. And I'm excited that we are able to do something kind of like at a distance here on unceded Coast Salish territory. And I'm always just kind of excited to see your face, Chris. And one of the inspirations for this kind of loose format that we've got for this interview is that we do daily Zoom meetings here at the Tyee, and we've really got into show and tell. There's been a lot of show and tell, like, hey, here's the thing from my house. Tell me a little bit about yourself. So it's been this kind of fun way to get to know you. So the fun format we're going to do today is we're going to ask Chris to do a little show and tell thing from his house, and then just kind of jump into three things. And in Chris's case, it's three groups of folks that he wants to hear more from. And I'll put the general caveat on this that this is a fun thing. This is not like the three top things that will forever be true for all time. This is a conversation, and we're looking to hear your input too. So we've got Jeanette, our publisher, who's going to be humaning the chats. So if you've got any questions, shoot them to her. She'll do her best to get them towards us. And we've got Peter Carlone, who is humaning the tech side of things for us here. And if you are running anything on the internet and you need it to work well, hit us up and we'll send you Peter Carlone's info because he's a delight. So, Chris, you are beloved, and we know this because when we said that we were going to do an interview with you, someone joked about a Christopher Cheung fan club, and then someone shot right back with a card to like be part of the fan club. So you are you're known for your stories that really dig in and have a lot of heart and really kind of connect to the interview subject, as well as really being kind of a wonderful chronicler of urban issues and things around the city. So we'll hand it over to you. What's your thing that you'd like to show and tell for us, just to get going?
Yeah, so it's nothing too special. Just it's just a can. It's not because I'm super into ginger ale or anything, but right now I'm not able to recycle these because the supermarkets aren't taking them. And I think there's only one depot here in town in Vancouver that's open. But I can't help but see a can nowadays and not think about binners. So if you don't know who binners are, they're the people who collect these from the streets and recycle them for money. And I saw that somebody mentioned that they were from the West End, and I know that's a really popular spot for people to bin. And there's a lot of different people who do this. They could be low income. I know there's a lot of immigrant seniors who don't have pensions, and they actually bin as well. But one of the guys that I interviewed, his name is Stanley, and he's a really great guy. He's a great writer as well, and he's also a binner, and it's what he does for income because he's homeless, and so he'll go around his bike in Vancouver collecting cans. And lately when he's been going out and checking people's garbage bins and recycling bins, he's been noticing that they've been drinking a lot more during this pandemic and eating a lot more as well. But they're actually ordering out. So he's been seeing that there's a lot of wrappers from takeout, but a lot of fresh ingredients being thrown away because they're not eating and cooking from that instead. And so he had a really sharp observation, and he was saying how people are living right now like it's the weekend every day from what he's seen. And I don't mean to knock on people who might be consuming a bit more of everything right now. Just everybody's at home a lot more. But I think this does highlight who is having an easier time carrying on right now. So who gets to stock up and who doesn't, who has a car and who doesn't, who gets to work at home and who doesn't, or who gets to work at all. And the big message right now, of course, is to stay home and to stay physically distant. But what about people who can't do that? So people who might not have a home like Stanley, or people who have essential work and they have to go out and they might be worrying about if they're bringing the virus back home. And people who might not be tuning in to these messages, so they might not be getting any updates related to COVID at all. So that's why for the three things today, I'm glad Emma mentioned that they're not like the three laws or anything. It's just three. There's three groups of underrepresented people that I really want to hear more from in media, and there's lots of different groups that I could have chosen, but for today I just have three from pieces that I have written lately, and they do overlap. They're kind of loose and vague, so take them with a grain of salt. So I've got low income people, frontline workers, and immigrants. And yeah, I say that I want to hear from them more because I think there's a lot that can be learned from talking to somebody at length about what they're going through. And sometimes you can read a piece that might be about a group of people like cleaners, but they don't actually talk to a cleaner. And so I'm really glad that I'm able to have that time to try and find these people, especially at the Tyee. So my editors, they know that it's important to get that voice in the piece.
Cool. So that's a great intro. This is going to be the easiest job for me ever because you're so organized that you're going to just cue your own stuff up, and I'll just sit here and look pretty. So tell us a little bit about the first group that you want to hear a little bit more from. Tell us about the story that you wrote and how you came to kind of dig into that perspective a bit more, Chris.
Yeah. So right now we're in the middle of a health crisis, but if you read the news, you'll see that we have lots of different kinds of crises in Vancouver already. So there's the affordability crisis, and that translates to the housing crisis, and there's different kinds of housing crises. So to do with homelessness, or to do with a lot of old buildings in the downtown east side, for example, that are in really bad condition. And in one of those buildings, I interviewed a woman named Erica over the phone. And she lives in one of these SROs in the downtown east side, and it stands for single room occupancy. So she has her own bedroom, but she's on a floor that has shared bathrooms. And when I interviewed her in March, they were already starting to wipe down doors and railings and things like that. But she told me that there was actually no hand sanitizer in her building, and in the washroom, there actually was no soap for her floor. So whenever she went to use it, she would bring her own little bottle to carry in with her. And so, we have that big recommendation from the government, wash your hands, but, that there are some people who might not even have access to a sink with soap.
So when you talk to someone like Erica, who is kind of stuck in a living situation where she can't actually follow the health guidelines that are being recommended, do you feel like what are kind of the emotions or the responses you're getting? Are people often just happy that you're connecting and that you're going to be sharing their perspective? Are they feeling angry and resentful? I know it's really depends on the person, but what are some of the emotional pieces that you kind of pick up off of folks that you're interviewing?
Yeah, it's kind of awkward, like not awkward for the person, but that there's a lot of, as I mentioned, there's a lot of problems that have always been around, but because of this pandemic, there's a lot more attention that are highlighting whatever's going on. So for example, meat packing, like conditions and wages aren't really good before, but then it's only now that there are reporters going in and trying to see what's going on.
So it's kind of that like, oh, like maybe I should have been here before and now we're here, kind of almost, is it almost more as you as the journalist feeling a little bit of guilt that you kind of have to work through before you show up and make that space to listen?
Yeah, I think so. Because for these people, they'll say that, oh, this isn't something that's new. This is something that has always been going on. It's only that much more worse now.
And it's interesting because sometimes it takes something like a real crisis to kind of put the angle on it that people can get in there and sort of highlight those chronic underlying things that are challenging to talk about.
Yeah, I had interviewed someone and I had used the word like it's showing gaps in our system, but then she was like, these aren't gaps, these are features of the system. So I think that was an interesting way to reframe what's going on.
Great. Yeah, that is a great reframe.
Yeah.
So,
sorry. Yeah, and also on this category. Like on the weekend, I had a friend who he doesn't have a car, and he was saying how I can't order McDonald's right now because the only McDonald's near me is a drive-through, and they wouldn't take me because I was on my bike. And so for someone who is like Stanley, who I mentioned earlier, he's not going there because he wants to eat the food. He actually says he cooks better food than that where he is. And McDonald's for him, it's like the only living room or office that he has. So it's where he can get the internet. It's where he can sit for a really long time if he likes, and he can stay indoors if it's raining or cold outside. And so right now we who might have a home and might be used to going to work, places like Tim Hortons or like McDonald's or Starbucks, yes, like we can't go there anymore. But I think for people like Stanley, it's I wouldn't have learned that this is what that space means to him if I didn't actually have a chance to interview him for this piece. So that's why I always think it's very important to actually talk to the person who's living that experience.
Yeah, well, it makes sense. And with such a quick shift like what we're experiencing now, we can all feel all these kind of unintended ripple effects in our own lives, however privileged they might be. And to understand what's playing out for other people is huge, for sure. Did you want to talk a little bit about your next group of folks, or did you have something more to add about folks who might not be able to follow the recommendations of staying home because that might not be their option?
Yeah. So when we went to frontline workers, and I think when we say frontline worker nowadays, everyone's thinking of healthcare workers. Like at 7 p.m., everyone's cheering on healthcare workers. But I really wanted to talk to people who are doing things outside of that right now, who's making sure everything that is still running outside is still running. So cleaners was a group that I was really interested in because it's not just about what they're doing for their job, but what's happening after they're going home. And a lot of them mentioned that the scariest part of their day actually isn't doing the actual work, but taking transit. So the three that I had interviewed, they don't drive to work. They take either the bus or the SkyTrain here in Vancouver. And I met up with this one woman named Vilma who cleans a BC Hydro building in Burnaby. So I was waiting for her at the Edmonds SkyTrain station. And when she got off the train, she was covered from head to toe. So she had these really big glasses on. She had a scarf over her head, and she had gloves on as well. And there's this fear about what family life is like now as well. So this other woman told me that as soon as she got home, she would always hug her kids, and because she actually doesn't just work one cleaning job, she works two. So that would mean her working day is 14 hours, and that's not counting transit. So for her to be commuting from Burnaby to North Vancouver, that takes a lot of time. And this turned out to be quite a common experience. So there's this other dad that I spoke with. He said it was the same with his three kids, and his oldest I think is 8. And so he really likes to, he hugs them a lot. He likes to spoil them when they're going out to shop. So if they see candy, he's the kind of dad who would like buy it for them. But right now, there's no hugs like as soon as he gets home, and also when they go out and his kids want something, he's just like, oh, be careful, don't touch that. So for his kids, because they're really, really young and they don't really have a sense of what's going on, they have a feeling that something is off.
So they just have a general sense of anxiety around their parent, which is stressful. And I imagine if you're working such a long day, like I had someone very dear to me who's a cleaner, and I know because they would just tell me how like strenuous that work is. So you come home from a super long, strenuous day, you just want your family to be there right for you right away. So yeah, knowing the like nuances of like how that is also interrupted, and even how maybe your home kind of feels possibly sort of infected if your clothes that you're worried about maybe contaminated are now in the house, and what are you doing to bag those up and tell the kids not to touch that either. And so did they articulate the sort of stress of those things directly, or was that sort of information that you kind of had to pull from people? Because sometimes you get people who sort of put on a brave face and say, well, it's not that bad, and you kind of have to pull that out of them a little bit.
I think I just feel, because this is it's like the weather, right? Like this is very much a shared experience. Like everyone's going through the pandemic right now. And I think because this fear is something they're dealing with every day. Like when they go home, like they jump into the shower, like everything is done with COVID in mind. So they were actually very open to sharing like what it's like in and out of the job with me.
And what would be what would be the thing that you got the sense that people really wanted folks to understand based on their experience and their challenges? was it just to be more appreciated? Like, what was the real takeaway that you got specifically from cleaners when interviewing them?
Yeah. So yes, they all mentioned it would be nice to get some kind of hazard pay. But one of the guys mentioned, it would be great if there was just some kind of acknowledgement from like our employers. And I mean, cleaning is like it's a good enough job for them. But yeah, it is that issue about the pay. It is that issue about like being recognized for doing this kind of essential work. Um, yeah, so and they recognize too that before, like, this is a kind of a job that's kind of invisible to society, but it's just like hoping very much now that people like see that, oh well, the reason that you're able to go into this one building is because they're there cleaning it for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such I can't think of, I mean, I'm not that old, but I can't think of a time when there's been such a quick reframe in terms of people's thinking around stuff. I know, like, I talked to my friend who has always been someone who's been concerned about germs and is used to kind of going to her therapist and going like, hey, I'm pretty worried about this doorknob, don't want to touch it. And her therapist usually sort of talks her down and goes, yeah, it's not a big deal. You can sort of manage through this. And then last time she went to her therapist, she's like, I'm worried about this door handle. And her therapist was like, oh yeah, no, that's an issue. And I just always think about that. And I think about how like it's such a big mental shift for so many people. And again, yeah, no one's thinking about surfaces they're touching, and we're all just not even worried about our hands and things like that. And all of a sudden, people getting you groceries and people cleaning things are top of mind. So I'm hoping that definitely hoping that people will sort of retain that beyond beyond when we're kind of out of the woods in this thing.
Yeah, like whenever I used to take the bus or go on the train, like I would always hold the handle, like don't really think about it. But then I have friends who like just trying to like surf it out by not touching anything and
Yeah.
like stand in the middle. And I always thought they were being silly.
And now you're like, show me your techniques. Do you work on your core strengths to be able to do that? What is it? For sure.
Yeah, I have terrible balance.
Yeah, we're asking it. Beautiful. Well, how about your last group of folks, unless you've got more to add, but that you want to hear from?
Yeah, so this is a massive group, immigrants. But I get really annoyed when you hear that phrase like, oh, like health problems are like very equalizing. Like no one is immune from COVID. Like anybody can catch COVID right now. But we do see ways how like a particular demographics are affected more than others. So racism is the big one right now. Information, where they are getting it could be from overseas sources, different networks. And yeah, as I mentioned about the cleaners earlier, a lot of them, like all three that I interviewed are actually immigrants. And the union was telling me that that's actually very common for them, like this to be their first job when they come over to Canada from overseas. Just because, even if they do have higher education, it doesn't always translate to getting that same job over here. So the guy I spoke to, for example, he was a chef. Yeah, so one story that I did recently about this immigrant group was about seniors in Chinatown. And so I always have this impression that people think it's that it's a very touristy area, or it's a forgotten area because there are so many other like Chinatown-like places in Vancouver. But I feel like there is this gap in understanding that it is still a neighborhood that people live and do things. And it happens that there's a lot of seniors who live there who are in seniors housing. And a lot of the reporting that I've read is about volunteers, social services, societies helping them out. So it's kind of a happy story, and it could just end there. But I was very lucky that I was put in contact with two seniors, and so one of them shared with me that she and her husband actually were brought over to Canada to take care of their grandkids from China. And so after they did that, they really didn't want to be this burden to their family. So they really wanted to move out, and just be independent on their own. But the thing is, their English isn't so good, and they don't drive as well. So it turns out that there is one place and that in Vancouver that was Chinatown. And so they could do everything independently. They are able to speak their own language there. They can buy all of the stuff that they're used to, and there's programming too. It's easy to connect with people. And so, with the pandemic now, I really felt like for them, the story is like, they were used to doing everything on their own, and they expected it to be that way for the rest of their lives. but then all of a sudden now they have to rely on others again. So it's, of course, the physical health part of this is very important, but I think there's also this dignity piece as well, this kind of mental health story about why this neighborhood is important to them. And so like for them, experiencing COVID-19 is very different. Like they like not a lot of them would have access to the internet. One of the women that I spoke with, she says she does have a radio, but she doesn't like listening to the news because it's stressful. And so even for me on the weekends, like I switch off completely. And so like we've been talking about outbreaks in senior care homes a lot, and I just thought it was so interesting that there was this neighborhood that it is a retirement community, kind of organically. Like a lot of the needs aren't like not necessarily directly from the government, but how a lot of the care that's coming up now is fulfilled by people just wanting to step up and help out.
Yeah. And how did you sort of get the lead on that to think of it as a story, as something to investigate, as folks to bring in and to chat with?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think anybody who was marginalized before is facing this like double the impact now. So it was something that I had written out before, but like, with a health crisis right now, I wanted to check in and see how it's different.
Yeah, makes sense. And how did you find, again, it sounds to me like if there's folks that you were talking to that purposely moved out of their family so as to not be a burden, those sound like people to me that wouldn't be very necessarily saying that things were hard or challenging again. So I guess I'm also wondering, how did you kind of try to ask questions and to listen in a way that would be able to get the full story from folks who might not want to be sort of seen as complaining?
Yeah, and you don't want it to be a reporter who goes into someone who's like it's hard to find, like they don't wouldn't usually speak to media and just ask like, oh hey, like tell me all about your very difficult struggles, and the more drama the better.
Show me your trauma.
So I think having just like a very like normal chat is the best way to do it. It's just, I mean this is it's a conversation, right? And it's good to talk to some of the service providers so they are able to fill in the context. So like, oh hey, like is it true that there are a lot of people who are like this? Like how usual is this case? The things that I found out, like it's having a couple in the neighborhood is actually less common because a lot of the seniors who live in that neighborhood are older women who live on their own.
Right. Cool. So just kind of testing the assumptions I'm hearing as well. Well, awesome. I see a couple questions. So if you don't mind, Chris, we'll jump into a couple questions from folks, because we've got folks here tuning in from Heart's Content, Newfoundland to Nanaimo, Vancouver Island. So that's definitively coast to coast, I think. So we've got a question from Jane Shee, and I hope I'm saying that correctly, Jane. Something that's been really important to seniors is art in the community. And it makes me wonder how community can step in now, in addition to the essential sort of care and support that people might be getting, say, healthcare and cleaning and other things like that. Any thoughts on, is that something that came up in conversation, those kind of softer sort of quality of life pieces getting brought into the community at this time?
Yeah, it's so hard because like one of the big things that people are talking about is like the digital divide, so access to something like internet. But not only do not a lot of seniors like have internet access, they might not know how to. They might not even have a TV. And I've been told that for those that are on a cell phone plan, they actually prefer the pay-as-you-go plan, so that they're not like paying more than they need to. And so if they know that you're calling from like a strange number, they might not actually pick up. Right. So it's very, very difficult to stay in contact with them. But like my grandparents, for example, like they're living on their own right now. So I mean, what I'm doing is just like trying to see them like from a distance. I'll drop off like whatever I can. Art not so much, but but yeah, like for softer things, like all of my relatives have been bringing food to them, so like normal groceries. But I know my grandma really likes port wine, and so
Yeah.
so I think having something softer that is like a treat in this time is really really important. And I knew that this wasn't something that she would be asking for, so she was very pleased when that was like one of the things that I had dropped off.
Oh, great. Oh, yeah. You need little like nice, not just essential things are, I think, pretty critical at this point in time as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. We've got another question coming in, Chris, and again, you can speak to this. It's asking about sort of fake news kind of comments, whether it's pseudoscience or conspiracy, that seem to be coming from well-meaning but maybe not totally informed individuals. How could someone who is trying to be a citizen on the internet or in the world respond when sometimes those people are in somewhat positions of authority, maybe through education or something else? As someone who has to critically think for their job, how would you recommend people respond?
Yeah, that is so hard. I actually did a piece on this because like way back in January, I was already getting rumors from a lot of relatives about this, and some of them were like really ridiculous, like like using there was one really popular one about like eating raw onions to ward off COVID, and it can be really really exhausting. But I think just and these aren't trolls, right? Because um, there are people who might be spreading things maliciously. But there's this expert that I interviewed about this, and he said that every pandemic is followed by misinformation, and so it's tough because a lot of families who are sending each other this information are very well-meaning, like they're doing it out of care, and so it's kind of like this anything that I could come across that sounds like it works, like I'm going to send it along. Um, yeah, so I think just continuing to have that conversation, pointing them to sources like whenever you can. I think the WHO and the BC CDC actually have come up with a lot more like FAQ, frequently asked questions pages nowadays, just to try and counter whatever that is coming up right now. So yeah, I think having that dialogue, keeping that open, showing whatever facts that you come across, is always good.
Nice. Yeah, very fair. I've got another question coming in. There was a cache of questions that I had missed, so we've got a couple more here. Another one from Jane Shi that says, given that journalists often report on stories during crises, bad times, how do you stay grounded when your piece is a longer form and relies on lots of behind the scenes research and waiting? How do you stay
Mhm.
grounded?
Yeah, I think I've been like you can really get bogged down in all the facts, but I've always been told by editors like the best way to try and boil it down to its essence is like, oh, if you're at a coffee shop or if you're at a bar or like meeting somebody for the first time at a party, and you're explaining to them what the story is about, you're not gonna just like suddenly puke out all of the facts. Like you're gonna give them like a very distilled version. So yeah, thinking about what might that headline be, like how might I describe it in like a couple sentences, yeah, is a good way to try and find out like what that story is actually about.
Yeah, well, it definitely makes sense. Well, we've got one more question from the comments, and then maybe I'll ask you a question, and we'll wrap it up almost on time. It says this question is from Douglas, and he says, your comments about seniors in Chinatown were really interesting. Have you had any interactions with refugee families? I'm guessing there is yet a third level of stress for them. For example, refugees from Syria would worry about loved ones in Syria, their own day-to-day stuff, their interactions with sponsors, language challenges, and COVID. So all of these different layers. And I'm wondering if you've had any interactions and heard that firsthand from folks.
That's a great question. For COVID, I have not. I have interviewed yeah, a refugee family before, from Syria, but I would imagine like navigating all of the supports right now would be like very very confusing. Like I have a couple friends here who are international students, and so for them like trying to navigate like
Yeah,
what Canadian supports are out there for them if they even qualify or not. It's really really challenging at this time.
totally. And last question, I guess we got a few questions in via email, and so many of them were really very thoughtful and very much based on, I think, the sender's identity. So there was one question about LGBTQ. I'm queer and I don't know the acronym sometimes, but basically queer seniors in care. Now that we're talking about care so much, there's questions about people and who are advocates in grassroots organizations who sometimes don't get heard. So all of these different people kind of asking for their own groups, how do you get heard? And I guess I'll turn that to you, Chris, and just say, as a person of color, what are things that you do to self-care when you feel like you're not heard, or you sort of see things on Twitter out there that don't resonate with you or make you feel misrepresented? What do you do to ground yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it is great to be able to have a voice like online now. Like when I was in elementary school, and sometimes like these are things that I'm worrying about, there wasn't really a channel to like tap into. So it is great to be able to like find that community online too. And yeah, like when I am in Twitter and I get into some cesspool, some kind of debate that goes on forever, it is nice just to turn it off as well. And just yeah, like just hang out with the people I know who do agree with me to de-stress. So sometimes just stepping back is always good.
Nice. Well, I think we'll end it on stepping back and maybe take a break from Twitter, just as a good piece of info for everyone out there. Thank you so much to Chris. And I'll end on a nice comment from John here that says, thanks so much to the Tyee for offering this series and insights into the pandemic, how the pandemic is affecting invisible folks. So thank you so much for your care and your interviews in this respect, Chris, and for taking the time today. Thank you for everyone who tuned in from coast to coast. And thank you. We're so happy to be reader supported. We couldn't do this without people who read us and support us. So thank you guys so much. Thanks to Jeanette and to Peter for making this happen. And good night. Let's see if we can turn off our cameras at the same time. What do you think? One,
Great.
two. Oh, I think I'm going to mess it up. Bye.
Bye.